Thank you for coming here. And I know there were some changes about the timing and the length of the CPD initially. So whoever it actually was a bit of confusion, I would like to apologize. We're learning as we go. And this workshop and CPD is going to be about lime. Here is the agenda. The workshop is going to be divided into two main sessions with a break and a plastering demonstration in between. We have some of the materials here. We also have panels, ready applied materials. You're more than welcome to approach us, and also kind supplies. They know the materials well. And then also at the end, the Q&A, you can ask about any project, anything. So I want to keep it interactive. If you have any questions, the whole purpose of the CPD is to learn as much as you can. Hopefully, it's going to be new. So in the first part, we're going to talk about the history of plasters, what various plaster types, where these Roman plasters kind of fit into the conservation concept. How can you utilize them? How it compares to to the other plasters? And then in the second part of the first bit, is going to be to talk about dampness, breathability, the importance of vapor movement, very, very, I think, important topics in all buildings. And then the break. And the second part is going to be about renovation best practices, some case studies, Q&A, and anything else you want, really. So my name is Val. I'm an electrical engineer. My first degree. Have been working in building conservation for over 10 years. I do a lot of serving work and project management. A few years ago, we started research, which kind of grew itself into a PhD. I'm doing part-time PhD at the University of Strathclyde. We have been operating since 2013. Generally, our specialty area is dealing with all buildings and dampness-related problems, which is quite a few of these cases, unfortunately, and focusing on building-friendly remedies, on Roman lime plasters, on lime technology in general, and also doing research. And thank you for Kind Supplies for hosting the event. So, plastering technology is an important part of dealing with dampness in all buildings, obviously, and we know that Romans 2,000 years ago, they have built buildings and some really impressive pieces of work which actually stand, many of them stand today. And they are an example for all of us. We're trying to figure out what they have done to some extent and follow their footsteps. They have created special lime mixes, which some of them are available, some of them are not available. And many of the things where the Romans actually were able to sort it completely with lime now, we're dealing with cement, unfortunately, and we're kind of resorting to modern materials. So a bit about the history of plasters, just to put everything in context. Lime first have been used in around 6,000 to 10,000 BC. The dates are kind of vague, a long time ago. And then when the Roman Empire basically has been going on around 1600 BC, initially the Romans started working with softer stones, typically tough, pumice, and so on. These were the easier way to build because they were not very, very hard. The strength of these materials around between 20 to 40 newtons. It's about at the same strength what we have today. Old bricks, that's the strength, around 30 Newton are the bricks. And as they went along, the problem what they have run into is that when these softer stones, they have been open to air, subject to open air, ice and frost, they started disintegrating. And also, for example, pumice absorbs 15 to 23% water, and when they get wet, they lose their strength. And this can be also seen today. If you have very, very old buildings, they get very, very damp. The bricks start going and crumbling. So, from a Roman viewpoint, some of these buildings lasting 150, 200 years, that wasn't good enough. And they said, this short lifetime, they need to do something about it. And as a result, very, very commonly, they have plaster. They have used a polished plaster, something similar what we have over there. It's a very, very smooth finish. They have worked, and we're working on a project with yourselves, with Andrew, and they have created this very, very polished, almost glass finished, and this is actually waterproof. In about 3-4 millimeters, you can actually create with lime with various methodologies. You can create completely waterproof finishes and breathes very, very well. And this has been used for these soft stones. And then throughout about 1,000 years, the Romans actually started changing their technology, how they have been building. And another 300 years later, around 300 to 200 BC, they started using moderately strong stones. And these are kind of limestone, marble, sandstone. These are very similar to the UK stone buildings. They are stronger buildings, about 50 to 100 Newton compressive strength. And what they realized, it wasn't the perfect solution, because when a fire erupted or something, because they also had timber buildings, then these, especially the limestone and the marble, they expanded as a result of the heat, and they started cracking. And this is also well documented. So around 600 degrees, they started cracking, and again, it wasn't good enough for the longevity of for the Roman longevity. So they started looking for other solutions. Also, they have developed the mortar technology, and around the same time, they started developing hydraulic mortars, which were or Roman concretes. These were limes mixed with volcanic sands and ashes, and we can see on the photo there. These are the pozzolans. These are the name. The pozzolan is coming from the Italian town Pozzoli, which is close to the volcano, and these are red, gray type of lava materials, lava sands, and they were mixing it with lime, and as a result, they were creating these different mortars, stronger mortars, but completely breathable mortars. And how we know about this? About 30 BC, there's a Roman engineer called Vitruvius who wrote a 10-volume book, De Architectura. And this is why this is important, because the only major work from antiquity which survived and has been about Roman architecture up to the Renaissance, about 1,500 years later. And has been translated to English, and it can be downloaded because there's no copyright on it. So the Romans improved the mortars and the stones. And then later on, another 400 years, because it was a slow, gradual change, they transitioned to hard lava and volcanic rocks. These are basalt and so on. These are the strongest, it's like granite type of rocks. They have 150 to 350 newtons, about 10 times stronger than brick. And for this, they have also developed more durable hydraulic mortars. Because what they have realized is that the mortar, if we have an old wall, we have stone or brick, and then we have the mortar, but which kind of links everything together. And the mortar was the weak link. If the mortar is not holding well, then eventually the building will not last. A lot of the large buildings, what we have cathedral and so on, a lot of the static things, you know, the stones are actually holding everything together. But the Romans realized that they have to do also, they have to improve the mortar in order to make it similar to the stones. And in this stage, in this era, they have created some really complex architecture with massive buildings, imposing spaces and so on. And two of them, which we see here, are the Colosseum, which basically 78 years after Christ. And I found a research paper. Everything is lime-based. They had structural lime. For example, the foundation is 6 meters thick. The Colosseum is actually sitting on a 6 meter thick lime slab, which just tells what the Romans have done. You know, they have done what we today do with cements, and they don't last as long by a long shot. The Pantheon, which is the largest dome, 43 meters, until modern times, this also has been realized with lime, and it's kind of one of the wonders of architecture. In England, the Romans had about 400-year occupation. So we had the Romans, and the Romans built a lot of old buildings, some of them standing, some of them not. They have brought the technology of brick making to the UK, to England. And unfortunately, once the Roman Empire has fell apart, then this knowledge has also been to some extent lost or went into decay. And this leads us to the Middle Ages, the Dark Middle Ages, which was almost 1,000 years, 800 to 1,000 years. And generally, this saw a widespread decline of the quality of lime and brick making. Very few buildings basically in whole Europe are basically older than the 11th century. So it was about 500-600 years which we had nothing survive from that era. Anglo-Saxon buildings usually have been made of wood, initially rarely of stone. And the Roman limes have been abandoned and forgotten. Generally, even when they started picking up the lime, there was a low-quality lime due to the impure sands, poor mixing, low kiln temperature, just lack of technology altogether, and total absence of the natural pozzolans because these were not available we were not a volcanic country. It has been imported by the Romans everywhere, and then that stopped. So the lime burning technology in the 9th and 11th century has been lost, and then it started picking up in the 12th century onwards. Brick making was a bit similar. Until the 14th century, there was barely any brickwork, and then in the 15th, 16th century started picking up gradually. All this information basically I have references, everything has been collected from references. And this leads finally, after 1,000 years, to the Renaissance. One interesting point here was the rise and the power of the church as an organization, or the churches. And everything from Rome has been declared unchristian and pagan. And as a result, the Roman art, the culture and literature, everything has been kind of fell into disgrace, and they said we don't want anything to do with it, which actually was part of this whole process. And after nearly thousands of years of dogmas and belief of the Middle Ages, science started coming to life, and they started saying, you know what, we want to learn, and they started rejecting these dogmas. And as a result, as part of the Italian heritage, which was there a few hundred years ago, Italy was again the cradle of the Renaissance. It started at the end of the 1300s, around the early 14th century through the 15th century, and starts spreading throughout Europe from that point on. And English noblemen visiting Italy, they were looking at the castles and looking at pretty much the Italian architecture, and were looking at wow, and that's how it started spreading. English Renaissance started about 100 years ago. With the Tudor period, wars were finished, everything started actually opening up. And Henry VIII, he invited Italian artists and craftsmen in order to start bringing the technology back to the UK, and they started bringing the terracotta, some of the Roman materials started resurfacing, and it was a small renaissance occurring at that period. However, after the death of the king, the Italians went home, and the whole thing again kind of has been discontinued. And this leads us to the Industrial Revolution. Second half of the 1700s, there was a renewed interest in the Roman mortars, just purely because some of the Roman buildings, which were over 1,000 years old by then, nearly 1,500 years old, built with these pozzolanic lime mortars, they were in very, very good conditions despite of the harsh climatic conditions. And then research started about what can we do about these limes? Can we reproduce them somehow? And not being a volcanic country, the natural hydraulic limes, what we have today, the research started with, which is basically a mix of lime and clay. And they take the lime, or the limestone, impure limestone, and they add clay to it, 10 to 20%, and they create the various strength of NHLs. One of the very successful projects was the Eddystone Lighthouse near Plymouth. They use 50% NHL mixed with 50% volcanic pozzolans. It's just one of those milestones. They had access, they purchased these Roman materials, and the project was so successful. And by the way, as far as I know, it's still standing. It has been relocated, but the building is still standing. It has been so successful that this specification, Roman materials and NHLs, they have been part of, they were kind of nationwide specifications for about 100 years. Eventually got replaced by the Portland cement. They also were towards the end of the 1700s, early 19th century, the Roman cements. You might have probably heard about that. These are the 19th century Roman cements. They were similar to the NHL, only they used higher clay content, and they created some good buildings. And then in mid 1800s, the Portland cement started taking over, and we have been pretty much in this thing for the next 100 years. A question which obviously we should ask, why cement became so successful? Why wasn't lime good enough? And the reason for this is because cement carried the promise, the potential to overcome some of the inconveniences or shortcomings of limes. And one of them, it was slow setting, which in the Industrial Revolution, you started building buildings fast. It was an issue. Time is money, as they say. And we get this feedback today from lime plasterers, maybe not from here, but some of them, they say, I wish it would actually go up faster. Or some of the plasters in general, they don't deal with lime because it's just too slow and too this and too that, and it's too complicated and so on. It has high shrinkage and cracking, had low strength, poor cohesion between the mortar and bricks, and also not suitable for the damp environments, poor resistance to water and so on. These were some of the points which basically the literature mentions that they were not happy about it. And the cement was giving the promise that they could do something without any negatives. So cement for the next 100 years gradually, but almost completely replaced lime virtually everywhere. We can see this today, unfortunately, including the heritage sector. And then we just learned that this wasn't the best idea. It was lacking research because cement was rigid, brittle and stiff, issues with breathability. It was cold, causing condensation, and non-compatible with the building fabric. The high soil content leaches and damages the old masonry, and you are aware of some of these things. And these negatives of the cement caused major issues in old buildings and are causing major issues in old buildings, significant dampness problems, the decay of old fabric, and obviously it doesn't last very long. It will start coming off. So where are we today? After the 50s, 60s, 70s, that the lime has been forgotten for about 2 generations, now is a lime revival, and historic England is reinstating the lime, and obviously as a result, we are going back to the we try to go back to the pre-cement era about 200 years ago, banning or actually campaigning actively to, probably it's a better word, against cement in the heritage sector, being forbidden in listed buildings. Softer lime being the only accepted material, this is kind of the most favored material. And also NHLs, which are relatively new materials, are also questions due to their hardness and reduced breathability. That's kind of where we are now. And the question is, are we on the right track? Is that correct? And what was interesting, as I was doing the research of this whole lime cycle, I just spotted a cyclicity of how things are going and which way are going, because we know the saying that history tends to repeat itself. We go into cycles. And fundamentally, what we can see that throughout history, lime has always been going through two development lines. One of them are the normal limes. They are also known as air limes, aerial limes, putty limes, and so on. These are kind of the sticky substance. Lime is kind of the origin of the word. It's sticky. It actually binds the bricks together. Goes back about 6,000 years, and these limes are hardening in contact with air, with CO2. And primarily, this lime has been intended for dry environments, and that's where they perform really, really well. And this technology has been lost to a large extent during the medieval times, and then has been recovered after that. And we have it, and we're making basically research and trying to get it back as much as possible to use it, to benefit from it. And there was a second development line. They were the hydraulic limes. The old textbooks, they call them water limes, which I think are pretty good names, air lime and water lime, because it's not very complicated, and it tells you kind of the essence where they have been used. These go back about 2,500 years old. Originally, they have been put together by lime and volcanic ingredients, and they harden in contact with water. It's a completely different mechanism. It's a pozzolanic reaction. And these limes have been intended for damp environments. That was the purpose. That's where they have been invented. This technology has also been lost after the Roman Empire has collapsed, and it has never been recovered. Here, at least. And 200 years later, or ago, again, the problem of the missing ingredient, the missing water limes were there, and they were trying to look for a solution because we are in a damp environment. It's a fairly damp climate in the UK. And this is when the NHL, cement, and other technologies came during the Industrial Revolution, which are different because they're lime and clay based. They supplemented the volcanic ingredients with clay. They work similarly, but there are fundamental differences between them. And where we are today, fundamentally, is that cement is obviously, NHL is questioned. Cement is not good. We have the airline, which is working well in many instances, but it also has its inherent limitations. And we kind of don't have the whole water lamp technology. Still, it's something missing. And NHLs were trying to bridge this gap with variable success and variable acceptance. And what we are trying to do basically is trying to reinstate this old traditional technology in the UK. We got in touch with basically we have been invited to some architectural talks about 5-6 years ago. Went to Italy, had been exposed to this technology, and since we have been working with some of the one of the Venetian restoration masters who kind of liked that we want to do something about this technology. At this age of his life, he's over 60. So basically, it's not about money. It's not about. He's basically has been doing this for a very, very long time, and he's tried to pass on the legacy to as much people as it can in order to make it survive. And then when we kept going back to Venice, we asked them, "Can we learn? Can he teach us this technology? At least give us some of these things back?" And he said he would be more than happy to do so. And then we just kept going back twice a year, religiously, and we have been working with kind for what, year and a half, probably something like that. And as you can probably say, Andrew, it's a learning curve for yourself, guys. The whole thing, you start bringing in some of the products, and it was a pretty massive learning curve for us. And yeah, so that's how kind of we came about today.